ask for advice and then that'll lead to money. Don't ask for money, because if you ask for money, that'll lead to advice. You start something new, you have no idea what you're doing, so you start looking externally for people to make decisions for you or to get advice. Hey, investor, what do you think I should do here? Oh, you should do XYZ. Hey, proptech industry principal, what should I do here? Oh, you should do X, Y, and Z. And what you slowly come to realize is advice without context is just bad advice. It surprises me how quickly people are willing to give advice without deeply understanding the context in which you are giving that advice in.
You have the same issue I have, a permanent shoulder drop down from the chips on your shoulder. People telling you can't do stuff, right? And then you're wrong, right? It'll never happen. But I always like to say chips and shoulders equals chips and pockets.
Yeah. How do you get people to notice you if they don't even know what you're doing? How are they going to think of your solution? We had no marketing person. We had very poor website because I just neglected marketing. I neglected content. And I think many founders make this mistake of like, well, marketing doesn't have a strong, bold line to revenue clearly. So why am I going to invest in it, right? Sales is like, okay, sales, revenue. And many people make this mistake where,
Yeah, I know some people are right now in multifamily. There's a debate if housing should be free or not, or should it be, there's a lot of fights, in Washington State. That's why I think I'd love to get your take on this. I mean, you come from the real estate industry. I think you mentioned like you have a background like multi-generational in real estate, right?
Yeah, but very, very uniquely. So my dad's family actually was super involved in real estate in India. So my great-great-grandfather, in the very early days, when the British still ruled India, he would operate on, he was a surgeon, and he'd operate on the British people. And for every successful surgery, he would actually get land instead of money. And a lot of it was sold, and I'm not wealthy and all this stuff. I have to preface with that. But over the generations, my family got very involved in real estate, buying, renting, all that stuff. On my mom's side, my mom was a real estate agent growing up. So I kind of saw real estate and was heavily invested in real estate in my own way. But I actually didn't come from the industry specifically. I worked, my first job was in tech. So I did tech consulting at PwC.
Sure.
And right after graduating, I always liked real estate for the idea that it gives you, it's one of the, I think the most amount of millionaires are made from real estate. And it was one of the asset classes where I felt like you can reliably, repeatably build financial freedom. And at the time when I was graduating, I was working consulting, but I didn't like the idea of being tied to one job, right? I wanted to have multiple streams of income, and I wanted to have optionality. I read this book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who's an economist, and one of the most impactful books I've ever read. And the premise of it, he talks about three systems, right? There's a fragile system, there's a robust system, and there's an anti-fragile system. The idea behind a fragile system is if stressors enter the system, it'll break. If you take a glass and you drop it, it'll break. Robust is if you apply stressors, it'll stay stable. But the idea of being anti-fragile is the more stress you apply to a system, the stronger it becomes. So think about weightlifting, right? When you apply stress to your muscles, the stronger your muscles become. So I think just thinking about that concept, I kind of became obsessed with the idea of anti-fragility because, the world is so dynamic. You're never going to be able to predict or project a path and get everything right. And ultimately in life, you're just succumb to the environment. So if you're succumb to the environment, you want to build a system, a way of operating where the environment is not going to influence you negatively. You're going to make it influence you positively. So I don't know. I just became pretty intrigued with this idea. And I was like, let me start a side business in real estate and let me build another stream of income. And the first idea I had was like, okay, let me just buy real estate, get some rental properties, get some cash flow, and eventually get to a place where the cash flow I have is more than the income I'm making.
Yep.
So I contacted my friend from college, Kendrick, who's now my co-founder. And I was like, man, let's go buy real estate. And he was like, okay, really? And I was like, yeah, like we can pick up some properties actually in Atlanta. We were like, Atlanta's a growing market. Let's invest in Atlanta. And very quickly we realized that like we had no money. So how are we going to buy real estate? So what we ended up doing was actually entering the Airbnb arbitrage business. So we were like, okay, let's instead of trying to buy real estate because we don't have money, let's go to landlords with their permission and sublet properties on Airbnb. So we'll pay a landlord $3,000 a month or maybe a couple $100 above market. The cost will be the furnishing. But then on Airbnb, it will make $5,000 a month. So it was an amazing arbitrage where you didn't have to buy an asset. You didn't need a lot of cash, and you could make much more than you were making actually buying a rental property. So that was kind of our introduction into real estate.
Did you start a YouTube channel on that? Because so many people have.
Yeah, no, we didn't. We didn't.
Okay.
I watched all those YouTube videos, though. One of the most influential podcasts in the early days for me was a podcast called Bigger Pockets.
Sure, absolutely.
A real estate podcast. So when I was 22, I've always been obsessed with podcasts. I think it's just, for me, there's so much downtime, whether it's walking or cleaning or whatever, where you can just like listen to something. Yeah. In 2017, when I was 22, I became obsessed with Bigger Pockets, and I would listen to like dozen episodes a day, just constantly consuming all these stories because it was so cool to see kind of everyday people, whether you were a teacher or a nurse or a janitor, and they had these amazing stories where somebody who was making less than six figures would, through like thoughtful execution, would become millionaires. Mm-hmm. And that was actually a really inspirational podcast for me. So I never actually started my YouTube channel, but I listened to a lot of these podcasts.
Love it.
Want to go back a little bit to your origin stories, right? Real estate, family being in real estate. Tell us a few differences between real estate in India, the way it's being like managed, the way they do real estate, and the way we do it here. I'm super curious.
That is an amazing question. So I actually was born in the Bay Area, but when I was 12, I moved to India. So I went to an international school from 7th grade to 12th grade in India, and actually grew up there and saw this firsthand what real estate was like. Man, it's when you're in a country like India, the way you get things done is through network, which is similar to here, but you can really get screwed over. It's not very like by the book. It's more who you know. People can take advantage of you. There's a lot of cheating and robbing, and I feel like you have to be a certain kind of breed to operate and do business in India. If you're successful in the U.S., it doesn't mean you'll be successful in India because it's a totally different skill set. In India, it's more just like kind of like knowing the right people. You have to know the language. You have to be a true kind of hustler because a lot of it is underground, I guess. A lot of it is like a little bit shady. Sure. And people will take advantage of you. And that happened in my family, right? Like my dad, when we moved back, his whole premise was, okay, I've worked in corporate America. I worked at Intel and AMD and all these tech companies in the Bay Area. I've done this for 25 years. I want to go back and actually get back into real estate. This was 2007, 2008 when the crash happened. We went back to India, and just year after year, there was bad deals, people, screwing him over. And I think what he didn't understand was it's just two different things. You can't, doing business in the US where things are more or less hopefully above board. You have ethics, you have like just it's cleaner to operate. You can't take that philosophy and go apply it in India because you'll get screwed over. So I think that was a hard lesson that we face as a family directly, and definitely impacted my view on, I guess, trusting people in business, but also like money, right? Like I grew up not very financially secure. Money was always a hot topic in my house. Like every problem that we had as a family was around money. When I think back on, starting my business and starting my company and starting the real estate business, a big driver for that was I felt financially insecure growing up. So I wanted to build financial security.
Interesting. I think my grandfather taught me, he was a developer. He would take a land, subdivide it, and then build homes. He was more on the home side, but he talked about not only dollars and cents in your bank account, but he talked about your social capital and your reputation and how important that was, and how you could build a lifetime building that reputation and fall apart. It sounds like in India, they're willing to, kind of like turn their backs on people, whereas in the U.S. you do that and you're essentially blacklisted.
Exactly. But the thing is, in India, there's so many people, right? Yeah. So many opportunities. There's so like you can hide amongst the crowd more. In the U.S., it's tighter. There's literally 4 times the amount of people in like a much smaller geographic square area. So
India's probably growing right now, whereas we might be shrinking right
Yeah.
now and sending people.
Yeah.
One of the things that, what I find so interesting, especially when we talk about real estate, I'm a huge fan of proptech, and I think eventually everything comes back to proptech. Mark Andreessen, who backed you, and Ben Horowitz, talked about it's time to build. And they are. I think it's Catherine who's on the American Dynamism team over there. Really incredible to see they take strong stances. Kind of, you've been through. You're backed by them. You're backed by YC. I believe so much of an investor backing you and a team backing you is about credibility.
Yeah,
it's about your reputation. It's about you saying, "I'm going to give you $1 million today, and I hope in 7 to 10 years you're still around and going to give me some money back."
100%.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of raising money and maybe some of the things you thought before you got into it, and then what actually maybe it turned around? I'd love to start there.
Amazing question. So, kind of picking up the thread, and I'll tie it back to the question. We started this Airbnb business. The way we started it was I was still working at PwC doing consulting, but my co-founder, who actually also grew up in a real estate family, his dad owned a small business construction company that operated out of his house. So he would literally see builders, architects, agents come in and out of his house. So he was submersed in the business. But in order to start the business, we actually he worked with his dad for a little bit, worked at SpaceX, and decided we had this crazy idea where I got connected with this landlord, relatively small family office, 1,000 units in the Bay Area, got connected to him. And he was telling us about how one of his leasing agents screwed him over and fled to Mexico and stole $500,000 and was just super frustrated. And at the same time, we were starting this Airbnb business. And one of the challenges we were having was distribution. How do we get more properties? How do we get landlords to trust us as an unknown entity? So we had this crazy idea where we were like, hey, why don't we actually become leasing agents and work at this guy's this company? Every vacant unit that they would have would go to us. And while we were doing this, we would build trust with the landlord. We approached him with this idea. He was like, no way, you guys have not and we offered to do it for free, by the way. We said, hey, we'll work for free for you. We just want to learn. Here's all the ideas that we have. And he's like, no, you guys don't have any experience. We're like, we both got engineering degrees from USC. My co-founder worked at SpaceX.
Sure.
Why are you saying no? He's like,
sounds too good to be true.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, you don't have any experience. So we're like, okay. 2 weeks later, he calls him. He's like, I need somebody right now. Can you move from Washington State to California? And my co-founder was like, yes. In 1 week, he packed his bags, moved to Redwood City. And over the next 9 months, he was a leasing agent. We grew our business to $2 million in revenue.
Wow.
Every vacant unit we would turn into Airbnbs, etc. While doing this, he was just watching us and seeing the hustle, because I had a full-time job. So this was my side hustle, and was just seeing the hustle in us. And I think because he saw the hustle, he decided to actually invest $500K. So he was our first investor, and saw the way we were building the business, saw the work ethic we had. On the other hand, A16Z, there's actually a very similar story. So when we were building, Astro was the first company. We would go to all these conferences, right? We were like, let's just go to these conferences, let's network, let's meet people. And there was a conference that I went to where it was hosted by this guy who had an Airbnb business. And all I was doing there was just hustling, going to people, introducing myself, talking, approaching, trying to get networked in, figuring out who I need to talk to expand this business. And we ended up breaking out for lunch, and there was a table of 5, and I ended up sitting next to Connie Chan, who was one of the general partners at A16Z. And this was 2 years before we started Zuma. And we were all sitting for lunch and introducing ourselves. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm a general partner at A16Z. And I was like, cool. And that's it. 2 years later, we ended up, the short story is, maybe it's a longer story, but I'll tell it because it's valuable. We're building this Airbnb business. COVID hit, completely destroyed hospitality, if you remember. We went from making $40,000 a month in profit to losing $100,000 a month in 5 days because nobody was renting anything. We had paid rent. We were renting these properties. We were just paying rent. And if we didn't change the situation, the business would die in 3 months. So we ended up basically building a virtual leasing team. So everybody at the company, we pivoted into building a virtual leasing team because we were like, we can't rent these properties short term. We need to sign 12-month long-term leases because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID.
Yep.
We need to stabilize this business. So we all became leasing agents, and we all ended up calling renters, scheduling tours, doing whatever we could to get renters in the door. In that process, we stabilized the situation. We found that this was a really viable business after talking to a lot of landlords, and we went out to raise our first round. One of the investors we talked to was Connie Chen from A16Z, and it was a 3-week process. She first said no. 3 months later, we came back. We had a bunch of traction. We got a lot of big customers. When we signed the term sheet, I remember her calling me, and she was like, a big reason I did this was because I saw how you were hustling at that conference. Even before I knew you, even before I knew what you were doing, I saw what you guys were doing. And I knew that you guys are going to do whatever it takes to actually make this happen. So to answer your question, I think a lot of it is trust and is emotions, right? I think as human beings, we think that we make decisions logically, but the truth of the matter is we make decisions emotionally. And I think getting people to trust you and invest in you is a function of emotion, is a function of the relationship you're building. They see tons of businesses. They see all these pitch decks of companies that are showing that they're going to go from here to there. And this is a tried and true story. And that I think the thing that people get wrong oftentimes is like, it's about trust, and that trust is formed on building genuine relationships.
Yeah, I love Michael Siebel's videos as well. I always kind of send those to people and say, just simplify it, make it simple. And then it sounds like your story is very much aligns with one of my favorite books, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, with Ben Horowitz, who, by the way, is an amazing, he's big into hip hop and rap. This is great. And I think we could go down a rabbit hole of the challenge. We'll have to do that on another episode of the rabbit hole of fundraising and the difference between actually raising money and building a sustainable business.
So was that the first check that you received that was cut to you, to your business?
The first check was that owner who wrote the $500K check.
Yes, thank you for the reminder. What does it take to get someone to write a check?
Yeah, man, that is the thing that people may get or may not get is most investors want somebody to once somebody invests in you, they want social proof, right? It's exponentially harder to get that first check than it is to get the subsequent checks. When you get the first check, it becomes so much easier because now you have some social proof, right? Our method for this was nobody knows us. I don't come from I didn't start any company. I didn't do anything crazy in high school or college. I went to USC, which is a decent school. And our method was because we don't have any of these brand stamps, we didn't have YC, we didn't have anything else. We need to just build trust one-on-one with somebody. So I actually thought of this, even before we started working with this real estate guys. I knew he had a lot of money, owned 1,000 units that were paid off in the Bay Area that he bought 30 years ago. So you can imagine how much cash flow is coming in. And my whole thing was I want to build really deep trust with him. And we took it to the extreme of let's actually work with this guy and let him see what we did. So I think, again, it comes down to trust and going really deep. But I think the message that I'll leave people with is the first check is so much harder than the next checks. And I think you just need to find one person that trusts you. And whether it's somebody you already know, whether it's somebody new, it gets a lot easier once you get the first check.
Was he the first person you pitched? How did you pick him? Did you try many people and he was the first one to say yes? So what was your thought process? And then how much did you know about him? And you mentioned the business being paid off, the partners being paid off. Did you know that when you first approached him?
I knew a little bit when I was talking to him. I was connected through somebody. So one of the things I did when I first graduated was when you first graduate and you're first entering an industry or the workforce, you have no network, right? So all you have is time. So the question you should ask yourself is, how do I convert time into a network that I can use, right? So what I would do is I would talk to every single person I knew and I asked them, who do they know in real estate? I'd get that list. I'd talk to every single person on that list and I'd ask all of those people who they knew. So all of a sudden I took one node or one relationship and I made it dozens, 50 relationships. Because if they connect me to somebody, I would get connected. I'd ask them. It's similar to the podcast, how I get the intros, right? Adrian makes an intro for me. I talk to that person. I ask that person, who do I know? Who do you know? Who do you think would be good? And so on. So that's the way I did it. Is I had no network, but I talked to one guy And I use that relationship to get a bunch of subsequent relationships. So I didn't know he was like going to invest. I think another piece of advice I'd say is, we were talking about this before the podcast, like a better way to sell is build a relationship and then sell. Don't sell and then build a relationship. Mm-hmm. Similarly, for fundraising, ask for advice and then that'll lead to money. Don't ask for money, because if you ask for money, that'll lead to advice.
Just going to say that is the core saying out there. You want that advice, then ask for money.
Exactly. So I actually never asked him for money. I never pitched him. I never did any of that. I said, how do I just give him as much information as possible about us and the business and what we're doing, and let him come to me and let him see that as an opportunity.
When you have to, talk about the emotional pain. Yeah, if you don't have an emotional pain, I think that's the hardest part for a lot of suppliers or companies will say, oh, I am raising an OI. Oh, I'm helping with, hours. I'm helping with resident experience. But it's like, great. So everyone says that. How do you get to be from a top 50 thing to a 1 or 2 or 3 thing? And obviously you hit it on the mark of like what that challenge was, and you earn the trust and reputation. I think the other question I'd have for you is, when you're talking to someone on fundraise, is it very similar, have you found, to a sales process? Like, is the process of fundraising and sales process, are they very similar, or have you actually found they're very different?
Very different. Very different. Very different. I think the way, and I'm changing my view on fundraising now, but the lore in the industry, in venture capital and with founders is like, if you're going to raise money, you want to run a very tight process, which means that you want to, in 2 weeks, have 50 meetings. Mm-hmm. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to create FOMO, right? Remember, I told you social proof is a big thing for investors. They want to see, once they see A16Z invested, all these other people want to invest, right? Because you're building social proof. So for fundraising, traditional advice, I have a different view now, though, but traditional advice is, condense the process, run a really tight process, and create a lot of FOMO and urgency. So if investors know that you're talking to 50 other investors, they don't want to miss out on the deal. It's very common for hot companies for investors to miss out on deals because they don't move fast enough. So traditional advice for fundraising is you want to create a pressure cooker environment where you're just creating this FOMO and internal competition, and people have to move quickly and succumb to that. Sales, you're not doing that. Like, I'm not doing that with my customers. I'm not saying
some people try it, but
yeah. But I think it's the wrong advice. And even that's what I did initially with fundraising. I've since now changed my perspective on this, and I think I go back to my roots. Right in the beginning, I didn't do that. I didn't create this pressure cooker environment. I built genuine relationships with somebody, and they genuinely trusted me. And it was this like, one-on-one relationship building versus like, I'm just going to like spray and pray, create this intense environment, build shallow relationships. It doesn't set up the relationship in the right way, right? Because it's a game. And in some ways you always have to play games in life. But I think now my philosophy for future fundraising rounds is I want to build a genuine relationship with the person who's on my board. I want to do it in a way where they actually get to know me, right? Maybe I talk to them for 6 months before they invest. A lot of times when you look at these tech companies, they didn't talk to the investor. They may have had the first conversation 2 weeks before. In some cases, it's a day before, right? Depending on how hot the company is. So I'm moving towards like, I want to build genuine relationships the same way I'm moving towards that for my business and sales. So let's build genuine relationships and let's see where those relationships go.
So you mentioned, we went over like the investment part. Now I want to go to the sales part. Tell us, how did you acquire the first customer? Tell us the journey there.
Yeah.
How did you land your first customer?
Yeah. So there's a book called The One Thing by Gary Keller from Keller Williams, the real estate agency. And the defining question of that book is, what is the one thing that you can do such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? So it's called the focusing question. What does that mean? That means that at any point in the business, when you're starting something from nothing, you are so incredibly strapped with resources that all you have to do is tightly define what your immediate focus is and ignore aggressively and ferociously everything else. Nothing else matters but that one thing. So Kendrick and I always had that philosophy, which is, how do we tightly define the focus and the aperture of what we need to attack, ignore everything else. Getting customers. The one thing in my mind was, If you're a fast growing company and you have revenue, nothing else matters, right? Like raising money is easier, surviving is easier, getting everything else becomes easier or unnecessary if you're a company that has real revenue and is growing fast. So that became the focusing question. So what we ended up doing was we ended up renting an Airbnb in a city, leaving our life behind and saying, we're not leaving this Airbnb till we get our first customer. So we really took it seriously. And what I did, because I didn't have a network, was every day I would have a Post-it note and I would tally cold calls till I hit 150. And I'd do this for months. I didn't know anybody else. I tried to use my network like I talked to you about. And that's how we got the first customer, which was a smaller customer. But I think the bulk of our momentum was me just like brute forcing it and like figuring out a way to get ignoring everything else. That was my only focus, is how do I get this customer? And in 3 months, we got 8,000. It's called Villa Serena Communities. I still remember one of our first customers, 6,000 units. We did a pilot with them in 45 days. We converted that pilot to a $150K contract. And that was the moment where like everything changed. We got into YC. We got another big customer. A16Z saw that momentum from zero to hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. And that really like catapulted us in the business. So I think my advice in general for most things is like really tightly define what matters and ignore everything else, because you just simply don't have the bandwidth in a startup to focus on multiple things.
Yeah, I'll never forget, like in San Francisco, our first customers, right? Like I remember at the time it was Riverstone before they were acquired by Greystar, and Potrero launch, and different properties that believed in us. Sayers Regis was another one. But what city was that first property in?
It was in Texas.
Oh, Texas.
It was in Texas. Yeah, Villa Serena Communities in Texas. In Houston. Yeah, it was in Houston.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'm curious about is, what is something that you see? Obviously being a CEO now, everyone wants to be a CEO. Everyone wants to be a founder. They don't realize oftentimes how hard it is.
Yeah.
A skill set or something that does you well when you're a vice president, when you're a salesperson, is very different from managing teams. What's maybe the one thing that people get wrong in the proptech world, whether it's on the ownership side or in the founder side or leadership side, that maybe is something or something you've learned that you thought coming into it, or you've heard some advice from people and you're like, wow, this is totally different than what I thought in terms of leadership or growth, et cetera?
Yeah, I have a very good answer here. I think when you're first starting something and you don't have a lot of confidence in yourself, you outsource your decision making to everybody else, right? Let's say I don't know what. You start something new, you have no idea what you're doing, so you start looking externally for people to make decisions for you or to get advice. Hey, investor, what do you think I should do here? Oh, you should do XYZ. Hey, proptech industry principal, what should I do here? Oh, you should do X, Y, and Z. And what you slowly come to realize is advice without context is just bad advice. And I think it surprises me how quickly people are willing to give advice without deeply understanding the context in which you are giving that advice in. So if I'm asking for advice and somebody has no idea what the internal state of my business is, how can you accurately give advice? Every business is different. It's almost like no human has the same DNA, no business has the same DNA. So the advice you have, I don't know if you guys are parents, but I was sitting with Kevin Owens and talking to him about his 4 children. And he was telling me that everything I do for my 4 children, the advice and the way I raise them is completely different, because the person, the entity, the business is totally different. So I think my biggest learning, what I think most people on the founder side get wrong, including myself, was trusting people and taking their advice if they don't have the context, the deep context in your business, right?
I love that. I have a saying, and Adrian knows this. I just mentioned it at a recent industry event on stage where some people said, how do you know who to listen to? I said, well, most advice is bad advice, and be careful of advice. And I said, especially my own, because when people, I've realized when people start calling you an expert, you got to be very careful with that, because what led you to here may be great for the industry. But now if you're trying to disrupt that or change it with technology, you have to be very cautious, because especially in certain sectors, especially real estate, if people say you'll never be able to change that. I always, to your point, asking the question is, well, what would have to be true for that to change, right? What would have to be true? Would the law have to change? Mm-hmm. We have to change a lobby. We have to change, people's perspective. And is there a profit to be made there? And to your point, is it a big enough pain point? Because if it's not, okay, maybe we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, most advice I've learned, especially from experts, I can see that you have the same issue I have, a permanent shoulder drop there from the chips on your shoulder, people telling you can't do stuff, right? And that you're wrong, right? It'll never happen. So I always say, like, I have a permanent lower shoulder here. I think Adrian has the same thing. But I always like to say chips and shoulders equals chips and pockets. Find those founders who have a belief. And then I love what you said about aligning with someone, or, it's a lot better to develop the relationship first, to understand the problem, and then to help, even if it's for free, because then you're aligning yourselves with people who believe in you and have a thesis. They might not even agree with your thesis, but they go, if you prove me wrong, that's a good challenge. And then you're like, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, wow, we had a surprise. Or one other one that we talk about is Amly. Amly helped us create a product years ago, and we didn't want to build it. And then they came in and said, hey, you should build this. And I was surprised. Have you had an experience where you were maybe surprised by someone in the industry of something you weren't going to go down a path, and you decided to actually add a new product or pivot or change your viewpoint or Kendrick's viewpoint?
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm clear here.
Yeah.
I take advice from customers.
Yeah.
Because they have context. Remember that. They have actually more context than me. So to me, the prerequisite to any advice for me is context. So I pretty much dismiss advice if the person doesn't have deep context and they just answer a question without asking questions, right? You have to really ask a lot of questions, understand the current state, and then you can give advice. So what I said earlier was more around taking advice from maybe founders or investors or people that don't have context. If I'm trying to solve a business problem and I go to a customer that has that problem, they have more context than me. So that rule doesn't apply there because they have a ton of context. I think that's what I've been surprised on my podcast, right? One of the questions or themes that I talk about is, what are the problems out there that people aren't solving, right? One thing that surprised me, maybe not surprised me, but surprised me how universally true this is the pain that customers have of all of these systems being so siloed, all of these dashboards that they're having to manage, and nothing that's operationally tying all of these unique platforms that have all these unique insights and helping them make decisions, right? I think that just seems to be universally true. It's I have 40 different dashboards and my leasing teams and my on-site teams and my corporate teams are logging into it, but I don't know how the maintenance request that I just filled, how could I tie that information to then asking a resident for a review? And there's just so much information silo. I'd say that was a big learning lesson and surprise that seems to be just a universal problem.
So talking about context, this was actually something I wanted to ask you, something related to just what you just mentioned. So you're looking at an entry-level leasing agent or entry-level person, pay the lowest on a food chain, and you expect them to be proficient in 60 plus, this is a real number that I heard at a conference on a panel, 60 plus pieces of software, right? So you have that expectation as a management company. And then here comes Shiv, and he wants to sell his product on top of the 60 that, adds more to it. So looking at things from this context, right, just understanding the end user and the level of overwhelm that they have out there, they're already way beyond, they're droning. And then you and other, tech companies are proposing more tech solutions. How do we balance that? How do we actually make it make sense? How do we go to a point where things are kind of starting to make sense, starting to be more sane for people? Because at the end of the day, I'm looking at this in this way. It's all about the end user. It's not about whom do you know at the corporate level that writes the check. I mean, that's a great first point. But if you're going to land a great contract, and then your product ends up not being used by the end user, there's going to be out there someone saying, why are we paying for this product? So if you're not doing something that's really centered around the end user and actually something that they enjoy using or they find utility in it, right? They really find it useful in their day-to-day tasks. You're really not succeeding long term. I'm not seeing that, being a sustainable proposition. So what are your thoughts on that?
I love that. I think it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Remember what I said about focus, right? When you're starting something from nothing, you have to be tightly defined because you just don't have the resources. So if you think about the problem, Adrian, I think it's actually spot on, which is the way you actually take something from 0 to 1 is defining a problem specifically and solving it. Because of that, you have all these companies that are attacking a one specific problem. The impact to the end user is that they have all these platforms that are solving individual problems. So I think, honestly, the way I see this is we're going to stay in this long enough to build a system that is ultimately super comprehensive to hopefully be the defining system. For example, you have RealPage, you have Yardi, you have Entrata. Usually you use only one of those companies and they do a lot for you and they're the defining platform. I think the way I think about this is in the next 5 or 10 years, I want to get the company to a place where we are building a platform that is configurable and that allows for the end user to use voice, to use natural language, to actually get what they want rather than learning. For example, I don't know, I would not consider myself great at Excel, but now I can take a spreadsheet, put it in ChatGPT, use natural language, literally use my voice and say, hey, I want to get all the customers that are this. I don't need to know like Excel formulas. I just need to use my natural language, right? And I think I'd love to get our company to a place where as a leasing agent who's coming in, who knows what they want, how can you get the system to work for you rather than you working for the system or learning the system, right? You don't need to learn how to use ChatGPT. You use what you already know. Use your voice, use your fingers to type. You have a prompt, you ask a question, you get an answer. I think if we can get close to a proptech solution that allows customers to not have to learn the product, but can use their natural language to get what they want. Hey, I just did a tour with this prospect. Can you send her an email and let her know that I really liked doing the tour and her dog is welcome? Boom. You don't need to go, where's the guest card? How do I send that message? All that stuff. So I think it's not an easy answer. And I think it's a true problem, which is in order to start a company, usually you need to start with the defined problem. Everybody's starting with a defined problem. You have all these solutions. But I think the company that stays in it long enough and builds the deepest set of tooling will ultimately be able to actually build this defining platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That was a big topic 2 weeks ago is how do you VCs, the question was, is VCs incentives are very different from multifamily owners, incentives, which can be true. But also a VC is looking 17 years down the road in a startup in a company, and you're going to iterate. So the concern for some multifamily owners is that something's going to break or you're going to build this and it's going to die out over a certain number of years, which is always possible. But in actuality, if you're backing the right horses who are going to build something that's going to keep getting better, keep iterating, to your point, adding more technologies. So how do you look at that, as it can be very difficult to get into this industry? Right. Many founders we speak with and CEOs, you'll hear them say it's very difficult because it's very slow. What are your thoughts around being able to integrate, breaking down barriers and allowing owners to make the smartest decisions they can and use the technologies they want to? Has that been a challenge for you? Do you have a viewpoint on, integration and playing nice in the sandbox and helping with that stack?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what you guys think. But I think my philosophy, similar to Adrian's, is like it's all about the end user. It's all about the customer. I think multifamily is very unique, to be honest with you, where people actually have a lot of these barriers. You look at Salesforce, you look at all these ecosystems, they're completely inverse, super open, super, they lean into integration. But I think multifamily is different, where it's been challenging to like integrate with some people and restrictions and all that stuff. But I think my viewpoint is, let's look at history and see what's worked. I think Salesforce is a storied company, and it's tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of market cap. Like they invented SaaS. Like they've done a really good job creating this ecosystem where anybody can kind of come in and integrate, and they're fully open. I think like multifamily should move that way. I think that would be beneficial for the end users. I think that would actually be beneficial for the integration holders, the companies that control this. But I'm curious to know what you guys think.
It's very fascinating because companies are typically attracted by a one-stop shop. If I was to be a final customer, I'll say the same thing. I don't want to go to three different stores to buy my groceries. I'm just going to go to Walmart or Costco, buy just about everything that I need. So it's a natural tendency. You're thinking what's the most practical, right? And I think the way the current large shops are being built is not sustainable long term. They're currently kind of like hugging the data. They make it very hard for me as a customer to say, I think that Entrada has like a better product than Yardi that I'm using currently. I'm just going to switch. That's a conversation that you almost never hear. However, with the advent of AI, I think that there's going to be technology out there that's AI based, that's going to eliminate. And then if they really don't innovate, use their buying power and their like financial power to innovate, they're gonna be left behind. This is not the future. I think the future is gonna be a AI agent built based on your tailored needs as an end user. It doesn't even have to be like company. It could be like to your particular needs. Because when you think about, look at large community, small community. When you have a smaller community with one leasing agent, they wear so many hats. So that need of a leasing agent is not to just lease apartments and do customer service. They do a lot more. So an agent that's really tailored to that person would not work for a leasing agent that works at 1,000-unit property. At 1,000-unit property, they're very specialized. They're very focused on sales. They're going to have a concierge. They're going to have a customer service person. They're going to have so many, everything's more compartmentalized. So yeah, it could be like a generic blanket thing for the company. But when it comes to specific situations, specific properties, I think we will get that specific to everybody's going to have like a mentoring or training body with them. There's going to be an AI profile that's going to deliver exactly the type of information that they need. And then there will be any need for like a one-stop shop or 60 signings or anything like that. There'll be like that one particular technology that's going to connect all the dots. But those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah,
I'm curious about, what you think.
No. That's beautiful. That's super well said. I was just nodding along the whole time because I think like there's this new thing in AI called MCP, Model Context Protocol. If you use ChatGPT, you're noticing now that they're developing a lot of memory of who you are, what you say, what questions you ask, what your personality is. Remember, it's all about context. Like now when I ask a question to ChatGPT, they're not giving me the same answer as they're giving Adrian or Chris. They're giving me an
100%.
answer that is tailored to me. I think software similarly historically has been built rigid, where you have this platform that's built for every business, but every business is different. Every end user is different. So I think the future of software, which I think you're making a really interesting framing, I didn't fully put it together, which is software should actually be built and tailored for you. When I log into Zuma, the Zuma platform should be totally different and look different and configured differently in a way that operates best for my specific needs and my specific business, right? And I think that's the ultimate solution is you have these point solutions that are solving specific problems. Whereas I think you actually need to take the platform all together and build that where it's like, hey, you have a leasing need. Okay, here, configure this. And now you have an AI leasing agent. Oh, rent collections is a pain. Okay, here. Maintenance is a pain. Oh, you want ownership reporting to be scheduled based on all the information I have? Let's configure it in the platform. So I think there might be an opportunity to inverse the way you build versus just building these point solutions to let's build this system that can configure itself into point solutions.
You hit it spot on, both of you, with the challenge of who is the core customer, right? So is the core customer actually getting what they need, and is it making them easier? I talked to some people who are using many competing softwares because they have to in the conversation and they would like to change. They're not happy right now, right? And also, oh, by the way, they want to work with another solution, and then it's difficult to integrate. It's difficult to work together, and they're building these solutions around, right? They're building almost their own AI technologies to scrape the data or pull the data, et cetera. So I think, one of my previous teams that I worked with, Eric Tornberg, he talked a lot about civilizations. It's interesting. Him and Mark would have discussions on their podcast about the rise and fall of civilizations. And it's interesting because if you think about like how Rome fell and you think about many of these governments that fall, universities outlast them. Well, universities actually make a lot of their content free to people. You can go to, a lot of these universities, Stanford, Harvard, and you can get it online and people are blown away that it's free when you have to spend $40,000. So governments oftentimes have stopped people, not allowed easy integration and work between countries or companies, et cetera, and they've fallen, or within their own citizens. So I think the same thing could happen is you become such a massive corporation, but you pull up all the toll bridges. You don't allow people across the moat. You don't play well with others, and people start building around you, and you're no longer a partner. You're a direct competitor. So I think like when I'm thinking about the industry, I think whether it's NMHC or NAA or especially RETSI, the new organization, their focus is on bringing more players to the game, allowing more technology in with different perspectives to say, hey, there's not one way to do it. They're not going to push one company. They're going to say, hey, we're going to actually pull not just the large companies, we're going to pull the new entrants in. And then we're also going to pull other people who go deep in a sector, whether it's like a Brad Hargraves or Camber or other firms to come in who are actually saying, hey, here's what we're seeing outside of your space. We're seeing this over in industrial real estate like JLL or in other sectors of marketing that are unrelated to real estate and pull that in. So I'm seeing a lot more people actually who are in the industry, CMOs, CTOs, CIOs, going to other industry events and then bringing that back for themselves and saying, I'm not seeing this in multifamily. I'm going to go out there to Salesforce's conference. I'm going to go out to other conferences and then pull that back into our industry. So I think that's what I'm really excited about is seeing CEOs who think beyond just the multifamily aspect and are going beyond and saying like, here's what I'm saying. Like I just did a post about the masters, right? And why that's such a great educational piece for our industry, or thinking about, why hospitality, your point about Airbnbs and Four Seasons and things we can learn. I believe multifamily, you're seeing it right now. Multifamily is having an existential crisis where people are handing over the keys or losing their properties. And so they have to think differently and they have to learn from other industries to make it happen immediately.
Yeah.
So.
No, I love that. Yeah. I was mentioned with Kevin, he was mentioning that if you look at all these sectors within real estate, there's, obviously student housing and hospitality and storage and all this stuff, and multifamily kind of falls a little bit later in the technological curve, right? And I was mentioning to him, I think similar to what you just said, is like, if service is a huge moat and differentiator for property management companies, why don't we go and study the hospitality industry and really understand what are they doing? Why can't we apply the same? Innovation is always dictated by the end user, by the customer. When I'm staying in a hotel, I have expectations, and those expectations need to be met, right? So if you rise your expectations to hospitality style and level expectations as a multifamily property management company, you will now suddenly be innovating in a way that hospitality is doing and applying that to multifamily. I want to ask you guys, Adrian, you asked me the question about how do you solve the problem of point solutions versus like overwhelming on-site teams. Like, what is your answer to that? What do you think the solution is?
Probably agentic AI is the first that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Creating those agents that are actually eliminating all those sign-ins, all that. Larger shops, larger property management companies, when you open their tech stack, is literally like the Apple store. I speak from experience. I don't just speak from outside looking in. Like you will have in concept, I think it's a great thing because, you get hired and you open this up and it's like, wow, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I could have everything. But then although in reality, you could have anything you want, you can't have everything. You have to prioritize. It's easier. That's why I think, Apple made such a successful product because it's pretty much like fail-safe. They build some boundaries to where like you don't have 1,000 options. They just make it very reduced, like, access. It's not like the Windows super open that you could do. And then that's actually focus. And this is not a personal observation. It's just from a friend of mine that's like in a tech business. He's very good in IT. So that really made me think like, look, this is actually like very good. It's great to have so many options, but then there's also a challenge. And I learned this, I heard when Obama was president, I heard that, one of the interviews he gave is that I have the same costume and the same clothes multiplied 7 times. And I wear the same thing every day. Why? Because I don't have to make a decision to debate with myself, spending time, which color am I going to use today? It's all the same. I'm just going to use like a different one, but it's the same color, the same cut, the same everything. And that eliminates a lot of like decision making and basically a waste of time, if you wish, right? So I think that's kind of, the first that comes to mind. the agents, the AI agents that are being built currently. They're just going to get better at it. Probably like 5, 10 years from now, we'll be amazed. We'll be looking at this conversation and you will look to us like, Stone Ages, man, like how much have we evolved as an industry, as a society? Because it's not just the industry. We don't live in a bubble. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot that's happening in the world. Example, I wrote an article, someone posted on LinkedIn about a week ago. They built a machine, a robot, that does 1,500 square feet of drywall an hour. It's actually a company from Israel that built this robot. Wow. It exists. A company in New York is using it. How many drywall crews is that robot going to put out of business? Not today. Not today. I'm sure it's not like perfect, but through iteration, through like repeatedness, repeating the actions and improving, 5 years from now, probably you won't see. 5, 10 years from now, I don't know how long from now. But the thing is that exists. And also what we might not realize, and we might think that today's labor crisis, especially in trades, is something that, nobody's going to resolve. I changed my mind on this, seeing the drywall robot. Yep. I think that they will build robots to do the maintenance work as well. They're going to be very complex. And they're going to start by doing the basic stuff, picking up trash, changing a light bulb, things of that nature. But as they learn more, they would advance. It's just like the human. But they're going to advance at a pace that humans could not compete. Right? So I'm not sure how far in the future that is. But it is in the future. That is the future.
That's something so that there's a classic ad that says ChatGPT finished building this building. There's a billboard on the front of that building. And we laugh and we say, oh, okay, yeah, you can't finish this building, ChatGPT. I disagree. And to your point, it's going to happen fast because it's going to be AI. It's going to be trained systems and robots that will be able to operate way faster, way safer. Instead of you and I hanging off the side of a building that could fall 50 feet, 100 feet, this robot can go up and down. It doesn't have to clip in. It's just going up and down that building and it's repairing. It knows what to do. It knows the exact measurements and it can swing pretty hard, right? Whereas you and I can't swing the same speed. So I'm a huge believer in robots. I think 90% of development is going to happen with robots in the next 5 to 10 years. Probably 7 to 10 years. We'll see it. And I think to your point, labor, anytime we have an immediate cost increase, delay, issue, people don't want these jobs. We're not sending people to trade schools like we used to. That's a major problem. And then I think your other piece is onboarding. So it doesn't matter, I think you hit on the nail. My perspective is that it doesn't matter the necessarily as much the problem you're solving. I've realized one of the greatest things I've learned is people don't necessarily pick the best company. They pick best in class at the best price, but also with the best onboarding and reputation. Because if I never have heard of your company, I'll never get to buying your company, even if it's the best. And number two, if it's too expensive or you didn't follow up or I didn't see social proof that I can onboard you effectively to my team. We think about Gary Gregory, who we had on the podcast. We think about Savas. They talk all the time about how do we clean up the stack? If I'm going to implement this in my company, what does that mean for the site teams? What does it mean for the residents of my building? So I think it's so important of what are the implications of adding this piece of technology to my entire organization. That is so crucial. Doesn't matter if you can solve a massive thing for me. I need to know what it's going to look like. And that's why it's going to take me 4 months, 6 months, 12 months to roll out.
So do you think there's an opportunity then to start with a platform that companies use versus like starting with the point solutions, or do you have to just keep building point solutions that ultimately become a platform? Great question.
So there's a debate. I've seen this debate from several people. We went with text because the app is too complicated and many people don't want to download another app. So I'm going to make it a text. And the other person's like, actually, we did the opposite. We did an app or we did a dashboard. And I think it depends on the role. Like you hit it on the head with the role of the person. It should change to fit them. And then the agents need to be so smart that if I'm in the field, I need to be able to use voice. I can't be messing around with logging into a dashboard on my phone or a laptop or having all these things when I'm walking a property and doing a punch list, right? And especially if you're doing hundreds of units and you're under a deadline because they're trying to acquire that building or they're trying to do turns or whatever it is, or refurb, you need to move fast. And the fastest way is probably by voice, to where the device is set up. And I don't care. It can be text, it can be an app, but I've got to be able to get in. I can't worry. I was talking to some people who, the pain of getting into systems because of lockdown access control. When I'm just trying to send information in, I'm not trying to hack it. I just want to send the data in and capture the data. But what's scary is how much effort and time and resources people put in, and data gets lost.
Exactly.
And people always will say, well, if it's not in the CRM, it doesn't exist. No, it does exist. It's out there. Someone actually did the work. You just don't have it in your CRM because you made the CRM or the integrations too hard to pull that data. So I don't know the right answer. I think there's absolutely like people, it depends on the point solution question. I think it also depends on the dashboards. People don't want more dashboards. They want one. They want one place to go to get all. That's why they say, hey, you got to integrate. But I think also like, how can you pull the information from the teams or even from the resident, like what Zach and the team in Tampa are doing, making it easier for residents to engage? On the maintenance world, how do you allow residents to change their own, toilet? How do you allow, are they going to do the sheetrock? If we're in a labor crisis, do we want to have a third party company where you're like, hey, I'm going to, my guy, there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 people, men or women who live in apartment buildings who could actually do the work and probably do it with half the price of what you are doing it for. So why not allow them to incentivize them to make repairs, to incentivize them? There's a company, we're going to have them on the podcast coming up locally called Roots. That's a REIT. And they are experimenting with that. They own a few hundred units, affordable housing, and they're figuring out ways to incentivize their residents, which is really interesting. So I think I always like to say, I'm pleasantly surprised by teams building in new ways where we think you can't do that. And then all of a sudden they take that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just so interesting to me. Like if you even break down the voice example, right? Like when you take a work task that needs to get done, what are the steps in which that work task gets done? First, you need to understand what needs to get done. So you think about it. And then once you think about it, you actually basically then set up you'll go and do that task. But I think for me, a big thing that's changed the way I operate is even using the ChatGPT voice function, just like dictating, like, this is what I want. And then it just cleans it up. And I feel like to prevent multifamily operators and on-site teams from going to this dashboard, it's like, let's just use voice or natural language to ultimately get what you want. I think you break down and cut out all those unnecessary steps. What's
something maybe a viewpoint you have that maybe many others don't agree with about the future, or something you're really passionate about? It can be beyond just, by the way, not even in our space in real estate or proptech, but it could be any space where you're just like something that's blown you away, or you're like people aren't seeing.
Yeah, within AI, I can answer this. I think AI is going to make people so much more empathetic. Even today, when I think about the way I communicate via text or email, I'm pretty, I tend to, on text or Slack, I communicate pretty aggressively. Not aggressive, but direct and like quick, because I'm just firing off messages. And on the other receiving end, especially if I'm in the position I'm in, it could come across as like rude or abrasive, or what is this guy thinking? Is he mad at me? This is aggressive, like why, all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because it takes a lot of time for me to like write out the message, and
you lose the context.
Deliver it in a way that's much more empathetic, right? Mm-hmm. What I do now is I actually just use voice. I say exactly what I want to communicate, and I say, make this sound tactful and empathetic and clear. And I deliver my message. It gives me a paragraph. I copy that and I just send it. And I've already found that it's so much more effective communication. It's so much more effective for me to actually get somebody to hear what I want to say without having to spend the mental cycles of how do I package this in a way that will be received more productively. And it's incredible, right? Like I'm noticing just like delivering a message much more tactfully. AI is maybe a much more empathetic person.
Incredible. That's smart. Great takeaway for anyone listening to this. So I'm going to use that more. As I think that's the challenge, is that I try to shorten my messages. I try to think about email as like a text message. And you're right. You lose that, wow, is this person yelling at me? Is this person rude to me? Or wow, but also you don't want to have all these extra words. You want to be very clear, and you want to be very direct with people to take action. Maybe what are you were doing the RV tour this year. And so you're going across the country, wild, crazy, what's maybe the biggest challenge to doing that, but maybe the most fun? It seems like you're having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, no, it's been a really cool experience. I mean, the hardest thing is running and building a startup is already so operationally complex and trying. Yeah. And trying to do that while managing the logistics of taking an RV to 20 cities in 4 months is like playing startup mode on like extra hard mode. So I think it just adds a level of complexity in logistics and operations that is just like really hard. I mean, I have my full-time job and then dealing with the RV, where do we go? Where do we park? All of the logistics, hotels, stay, scheduling is so much logistics that I'm like, wow, this is definitely hard. But I think the cool thing about it is like, I'm really getting a deep understanding of our customer and our industry, right? I think what I've learned is there's nothing like sitting down with you guys, in person and actually having a conversation and learning about how you think, learning about the industry, learning about where you came from, that I think will become so monumentally powerful for our business and in some way a true moat, right? Who is sitting down with 100 industry leaders in 4 months face to face? Which technology company or founder has the opportunity to do that, right? And I think because of all of these relationships, I think it's really going to inform how we build the product, what I know about the industry, my aspirations. I'm already finding that I'm so much more inspired to build something because I actually see all the problems. I hear about people's stories, how they got into the industry. And it's created this emotional connection with what we're doing, right? Even sitting down, listening to Adrian talk about, you guys talk about how do we build this platform and the ideas. I was just like so excited because I'm like, wow, there's a real opportunity here to build something that actually adds a lot of value. How cool would it be to solve the problem of, there's dozens and dozens of systems and silos? How cool would it be to actually like build that? So I think an unexpected takeaway from this RV Roadshow has been just the emotional connection I'm building for the industry, the empathy I'm having for the problems we're solving. And then I think something else that's been a big takeaway is using what we talked about earlier, which is, I'm not selling actually on this trip. I'm like building relationships and I'm letting people get to know me. I'm letting them get to know the company and then I'm getting to know them. And naturally it's leading to conversations where it's ultimately fruitful for the business, right? And I think the way I also see this is like, even if we don't work together, this year, like maybe we will next year. And you're almost building this like relationship bank account where you can, you or they can tap into when there's a need. So
100%. So many relationships that I've had where we didn't do business for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but it's funny, people come back to me now, even after I've left those companies, they're like, oh, we're rolling it out. It's amazing. So it's always great that I feel like people say, oh, they try to have that work-life balance. And I go, you know what? I've learned this from Jesse Itzler. If you're really excited and you're really good at what you do, it overlaps. You're going to, I try to bring my kids, I have 3 kids. They're young, but I'm trying to bring them into the business. I want to show them things I'm working on. I'm going to help them build businesses right now because I absolutely love it. And I think the earlier point in your life that you can be exposed to business, economics, money, it just sets you off on a better path.
I love that. Yeah, Danielle Kuntz from Rangewater, we did a podcast with her, and she actually brought her whole family to the RV, her kids to the RV in I forgot which city, Texas, somewhere in Texas, and brought them there. And it was such a good reminder of like, bring integrate your life. I mean, you see Elon Musk bring X to the Oval Office, which is a different extreme. But yeah, I agree with that.
I want to go talk a little bit about content creation. What determined you to become a content creator? And would you go back to not being one after this experience?
Would I go back to not being one? I think it's actually a lot to do with what we've talked about, right? I think as technology gets more and more advanced, as the ability to build a product becomes easier, now there's something called vibe coding. I don't know if you've heard of that, but you use natural language to write code, right? My belief is that product building is going to get commoditized over time. I think the way you differentiate is not the product you have necessarily. It could be, but I think the pace and the velocity in which you can build product if you're a high-powered team is so high now that somebody can go and replicate and mimic what you're doing. So that being said, what are the moats or the differentiators that are going to stand the test of time? I think brand is a big one. I think personal brand with the founder, I think personal brand, the company brand, is a big one because especially in this industry, what is brand? Brand means you have a connection to something. This industry is built on relationships, on connection. So if I project, over the next years, it's going to get increasingly competitive on the product side. So I think the way I think about it is like, how do you get, like you said, how do you get people to notice you if they don't even know what you're doing? How are they going to think of your solution? So I think the reason why I got into content was, you know, if you look at our LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page 6 months ago, I did nothing related to content. We had no marketing person. We had very poor website because I just neglected marketing. I neglected content. And I think many founders make this mistake of like, well, marketing doesn't have a strong bold line to revenue clearly. So why am I going to invest in it, right? Sales is like, okay, sales, revenue. And many people make this mistake where you see a blurry line to revenue. So it's like, I'm not going to prioritize it. But I think it's also building a moat and a brand and a reputation where now in 2 years, if I continue to post, I mean, imagine you guys are already here, right? You DM somebody on LinkedIn or you want to get to somebody in the industry, you can get to them, I'm sure, with your relationships, right? How powerful is that?
Many occasions, yeah.
We actually have people now asking us, the CEOs who've never been on a podcast, saying, Chris, I want to be on your podcast now. I was
Exactly.
like, amazing. Right?
Exactly. And what happens to the relationship dynamic? Now, you're not you guys are not you're not like somebody trying to hammer on the CEO's door to get something from them. Now it's an equal playing field. It's like, okay, like this guy respects me. I respect them. We're on equal playing field. You know, it's not like I'm not some vendor like hammering on the CEO's door saying like, please take a demo with me or please. So I think it's like about like relationship building and it's about leveling the playing field and it's about getting to a place with brand and content, you know, when the time comes and I want to build a relationship with somebody, I have the power to, or I have power is not the right word, but I have the ability to, right? I have the ability to because we've built a brand. So
I think one of the other key things of some of the best storytellers, some of the best creators they're curious. They're diving in to ask a question more than, you know, like me. A lot of this is like, I have a belief, but it's loosely held. You know, I'm happy to be changed or see a different perspective. And I think also like you're going deep, like you said, beyond your product, you're going deep into their challenges, their life history, you know, things that they're seeing and emotional things that they've been through. Like some of the stories you shared can be very emotional, very tiring, very taxing, uncertainty in life. So I think a lot of things, you know, you see these creators are sometimes perfection, but the best moments are actually the hardships we've gone through, the mistakes we've made, that we're learning lessons that you can share with others. So I love sharing that. Like today we have Steve Halsey's in town, who has retired twice from the industry. He was the CEO, you know, sold Charles B. Smith, was the CEO of Amley, and then was the CEO of our managing director at Wood Partners, which sold to Greystar. And it's incredible to have him as a mentor and hear his stories and the things he's doing and how he's paying it forward. And hopefully he'll come back to the industry one day. So that's what I think about is like telling people stories, to your point, it is about relationships. And it's about, you know, to your point about brand, a brand is just trust. Do I trust your brand or do I not? Apple, am I going to keep paying you money year in, year out? I'm not going to leave because even if I have some issues, I still am going to stick with you, even if someone else is cheaper, half the price. Same thing with Southwest Airlines, right? Southwest is going through an existential moment right now of changing as an airline. We have Delta Airlines here and people looking at both airlines and deciding which way am I going to go? And are you pushing me away or are you pulling me in? And at the end of the day, I think so much of it I hear from people is emotional. To your point, they're making the decision up front emotionally, but then they're backing it up with data, backing it up with their pocketbook, backing it up with the decision making of their family or of their company. And is this going to cause, can I sleep at night? And I think at the end of the day, people will pay more, go with a different company because they can sleep at night.
Exactly.
Because their lawyer says this may not make you as much money, but will protect you from the downside.
Exactly. And I think that's why relationships, even, you know, and I don't think it's just this industry, right? Like I can see myself as a company becomes bigger, as we start working with more vendors, like partnering with people, which I already have, people that I trust because of it's insurance. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm paying for insurance. I know that like I have a relationship with Adrian, I have a relationship with Chris. If something goes wrong, I know I can call them or text them and they'll be on it, right? And that's valuable. So that's like, maybe it's the worst product or better product, but ultimately the experience that I'm getting is stronger because I can text these people. I have a relationship with them and I trust that they'll be on it to solve something.
The greatest thing is you can build a reputation over a lifetime and tear it away in one day. I think to your point also, communication and awareness. If you don't communicate and you drop the ball and now people can't get in touch with you, are you available by text? Are you available to jump on a call? You know, that's what people look for, especially in an industry as you know, these are $100 billion, you know, organizations. They need responsiveness.
Exactly.
Shiv, great to have you, brother, today. It was amazing to have you. I think you owe us a second conversation. I had like a 3-page, 25-question list that I haven't even asked the first question. And that's actually great news. That's an amazing. It's been really great having you and very fascinating. I could have gone for hours still.
We may have to have a debate too. We may have to do some. I know you could probably debate pretty well, so we have to debate, and we'll have to,
let's do it.
Yeah, well, and your podcast again. Share with the audience the name of the podcast so that if people can download it.
Yeah, of course. It's called Humans of Multifamily. We're about 28, maybe 30 episodes in. Okay. We release every Tuesday and Thursday, so twice a week. But yeah, personal stories, as you guys have seen, less focused on ideas and innovation and more focused on people's stories, how they got here, where do they come from, the highs and lows in their career, etc. But no, thanks, guys. This has been really fun. I definitely feel like I could go on for many hours.
Easily.
And this has been one of the best podcast experiences that I've done. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming to the studio. It adds a whole element when we're here in person. So.
Yeah, definitely.